Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
They skipped my graduation for a spa weekend with my sister. Said it was a mental health thing. Said I'd understand. And I did, just like I understood when they forgot my 16th birthday because Chloe's boyfriend broke up with her and she couldn't be left alone, and just like I understood when they left early from my senior debate championship because Chloe felt faint and needed to be taken home. I've been understanding since before I even knew what the word really meant, since before I realized that what they called supporting Chloe through her rough patches actually meant abandoning me during my proudest moments. And this time, as I held the phone to my ear and listened to my mom's voice, chirpy and upbeat like she was ordering brunch instead of breaking news, I didn't cry or yell. I just swallowed the same bitter lump that's lived in my throat since I was maybe 12. Nodded as if she could see it, and said, "Yeah, sure, I get it." What else could I say? I already knew the script. Chloe had a panic attack, she explained. It's just bad timing, sweetie. The spa had this opening and we thought it could be a nice reset for her, especially after how tough this semester has been. Not a single mention of my graduation. Not a word about how I was giving the valedictorian speech, or how this was the first time I was ever going to be on stage, not as a background player to Chloe's endless crises, but as the actual center of attention. The one moment that was supposed to be about me. And all I got was a cheerful, "I know you understand, honey. You've always been so mature." I don't even think she meant to be cruel. That's the worst part. It wasn't some cartoonish act of villainy, it was just business as usual. In my family, Chloe has always been the sun, and the rest of us? We orbit. She cries and everything stops. She pouts and we rearrange schedules. She sulks and vacations get canceled or rerouted to suit her mood. I think there's something almost addictive about her chaos, something my parents have been feeding off for years, this belief that if they just give her one more thing, say yes one more time, maybe that'll finally make her stable. I used to tell myself they'd eventually realize I was quietly drowning in their good intentions. But no. They never noticed. Or worse, they noticed and decided I could handle it. That's the real kick in the teeth, being the kid who gets ignored not because you're unloved, but because you're strong enough to take the hit. They never said those words exactly, but the message was always clear. You're okay, Marissa. You don't need us the way Chloe does. So yeah, when I got the voicemail, because of course it was a voicemail, not even a real call confirming that they wouldn't be coming to the graduation, that they were already checked in at some luxury retreat with cucumber water and eucalyptus steam rooms. I didn't cry. I just sat down on the edge of my bed, stared at the neatly folded graduation gown hanging on the back of the closet door, and said, out loud to no one, of course they're not coming. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not even Tasha, my best friend since sophomore year and the only person who ever really saw what went on behind the social media perfect images my family posted. The smiling Christmas cards, the birthday cakes with "Happy Birthday to the best daughters in the world," the matching mother-daughter spa photos with Chloe front and center and me half cropped out of the corner, all of it carefully curated to hide the cracks. Tasha knew some of it, of course. She'd seen the way my mom's eyes only lit up when Chloe entered a room, had noticed how every family dinner somehow became about Chloe's grades, Chloe's emotions, Chloe's boyfriend, Chloe's therapy breakthroughs. Still, I didn't have the energy to explain that even this, my graduation, had been surrendered. But then the next day, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a delivery guy holding a bouquet of pink tulips and white roses, Chloe's favorite. I knew that before I even looked at the card. When I did, it read, "We're so proud of both our girls. Wish we could be there. Love, Mom and Dad." Not a single mention of my name. Not a word about me. Just both our girls. It was Chloe's bouquet. I was an afterthought. That night, I sat on the bathroom floor with a note in one hand and the bouquet crushed in the trash can beside me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the card and thought, this is who they are. They're never going to change. So maybe I will. Because the truth is, I've been playing the part they gave me for so long, I almost forgot I could rewrite it. I could go on stage and smile politely, pretend it didn't hurt, play the bigger person one more time, or I could say something. Not a tantrum, Not some messy confrontation. Something subtle. Something clean. Something that would finally make them see, even if it burned a little on the way in. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say yet, but I knew one thing with perfect clarity. I wasn't going to let them steal this from me. Not quietly. Not again. And when the day came, when I put on my gown and walked past all the cheering families, the balloon clusters, the moms crying behind their sunglasses, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not happiness. Not pride. But the calm before a storm. Because they weren't there. And maybe, for once, that was a gift. I'd been invisible to them for years. But tomorrow? Tomorrow, they were going to hear me. Whether they liked it or not. There's a specific kind of ache that settles in your chest when you walk out into a crowd of families, cheering, hugging, clapping, crying, all of them bundled up in the joy of shared pride, and realize that the only people who were supposed to be there for you, the ones who should be crying the loudest, holding the biggest sign, maybe even embarrassing you a little with their joy, are instead wrapped in towels and drinking green smoothies while your name echoes off a microphone in an auditorium they didn't bother to walk into. It's not the kind of pain that makes you scream or sob. It's quieter, denser, like swallowing something sharp and pretending it was smooth. That morning, I woke up with my stomach in knots, not from nerves about the speech or walking across the stage, but from the sheer dread of pretending everything was okay, because that's what I'd always done. That was the role I played in the family dynamic, the girl who didn't make a fuss, who swallowed disappointment with a smile, who made space for her sister's emotions even when it meant burying her own. I'd become so good at pretending I was unaffected that sometimes even I started to believe it. But not today. Today, I was aware of every beat of that hurt, every inch of that hollowness. Tasha arrived 30 minutes early, holding a giant iced coffee in one hand and a roll of tape in the other, ready to hang up the ridiculous cardboard cutout of my face she'd made. It was the kind of embarrassing friend gesture that, in any other moment, would have made me laugh and groan in equal measure, but today it almost made me cry, not because of the absurdity, but because she showed up. That's it. She showed up. She didn't make excuses or change plans or apologize while canceling. She just came. And that was more than I could say for the people who gave me life. When the ceremony started, I scanned the rows of chairs one more time, not really expecting anything, but still holding out a tiny, pathetic hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd changed their minds and shown up at the last second. That maybe they'd walk in flustered and late, Chloe's spa hair still damp, my mom whispering, "We made it." But no. The rows were full of parents clutching bouquets and cameras, families squished together on bleachers, grandparents beaming from folding chairs. No familiar faces. No, we're here. Just space where they should have been. The dean gave a long-winded speech full of metaphors about doors and journeys and building bridges, most of which I didn't hear. My heart was pounding too loudly in my chest, and every few seconds I'd glance down at my note cards, the ones I'd spent 3 nights crafting, full of thoughtful anecdotes, inspirational quotes, and generic pleasantries meant to make people feel warm and fuzzy about the future. The version I was supposed to give. The version my mother would have loved. But sitting there, staring out at the crowd of strangers and the occasional classmate, all of them surrounded by noise and joy and presence, I felt something shift. Something final. Like a quiet rebellion was taking shape inside me, not loud or dramatic, but solid, cold, and unshakable. When they called my name, Marissa Lee Porter, valedictorian of the class of 2025, I stood, adjusted my gown, and walked toward the stage. My palms were sweating. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew exactly what I was about to do. And I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop once I started. I took the podium, smiled at the sea of unfamiliar faces, and began with the scripted intro, the one the administration had approved. Good afternoon, faculty, friends, family, and classmates. It's an honor to stand here today as we mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. My voice was steady, my delivery smooth, and for the first minute, it was exactly the speech everyone expected. But then I paused. Just long enough to feel the tension shift, the silence ripple. I looked up from my note cards, stared out into that packed auditorium, and let the next sentence fall from my mouth like a stone into water. Funny how the right people always find time. There it was. Clean. Unapologetic. Quiet, but sharp. I let it hang in the air. There was a ripple of laughter, soft, nervous, as if people weren't sure whether it was a joke or a quote. Maybe some thought it was just a vague, motivational platitude. But a few heads turned. A few people shifted uncomfortably. One professor raised an eyebrow. And in that moment, I wasn't reading a speech anymore. I was carving out a piece of truth that had been buried under years of polite silence. I kept going, each word more measured than the last. We're told that success is about hard work, about sacrifice, about persistence. But what they forget to mention is how easy it is to lose yourself while trying to earn the applause of people who are too busy to hear it. Sometimes, the loudest victories are the ones you celebrate alone. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones no one noticed were standing the whole time. It wasn't a meltdown. It wasn't a tantrum. It was something cleaner, colder, the kind of honesty that doesn't need to scream to cut deep. And when I stepped back from the podium, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what I'd done. I knew who had heard it, even if they weren't in the room. 2 hours later, my phone lit up with Chloe's name. She called 4 times in a row before I finally picked up. She was crying, not the soft, sniffly kind, but the loud, raw sobbing that comes from either guilt or fury, and I couldn't tell which one it was yet. "You humiliated Mom," she shrieked through the phone, her voice cracking. "Everyone's calling her, asking if you meant them. Are you happy now? You made her cry. At a spa, Marissa." I didn't respond right away. I just held the phone to my ear and let her words hang there, letting her fill the silence with her indignation, her noise, her usual chaos. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, unshaken. I wasn't talking about Mom. And then I hung up. Because the thing about growing up in a house where everything revolves around someone else's drama is that you learn how to make your own silence louder than their shouting. And I wasn't done being loud yet. It didn't take long, maybe a day, maybe less, before the aftershocks of my graduation speech started to ripple outwards, not in the form of congratulations or thoughtful messages from distant relatives, but as whispers, accusations, and thinly veiled attempts at damage control, all of which arrived cloaked in a familiar, suffocating tone of passive aggression that I had been decoding since childhood. The first sign came in the form of a vague, smug Instagram story posted by Chloe, some glittery text on a muted background that read, "People will throw you under the bus just to pretend they're standing tall," complete with a sad song and a half-second clip of a champagne glass clinking in a hot tub. I didn't reply. I didn't even screenshot it. I just stared at it with the kind of numbness that only comes after years of being the designated bigger person, the one who's expected to bite her tongue, let things go, and be grateful for crumbs. Then came the phone call, not from Chloe, who was presumably still too busy crafting more melodramatic content for her audience of sympathetic friends, but from my mother, who had apparently decided it was time to play peacemaker, though her tone sounded more like that of a PR manager trying to contain a scandal than a parent reaching out to her daughter. "Marissa, honey," she began, and already I felt my stomach turn, because I knew that tone, that sweet, syrupy voice that always preceded manipulation dressed up as concern. "Your speech, it was powerful. Truly. But, well, Chloe's having a really hard time with it, and we were all a little surprised. I just wish you'd told me how you were feeling sooner." I let her speak, let her fill the silence with her polished disappointment, with phrases like, "We never meant to hurt you, and you've always been the strong one, because that's how it always went." My pain was acknowledged only when it created a ripple large enough to disturb the surface, and even then, it was met with confusion, as though my emotional response was the real problem and not the years of neglect that caused it. When she finally paused, I asked, calmly, "Do you even know what I said?" There was a pause, short but telling, before she replied, "Well, not all of it, but Chloe told me." And there it was. Chloe told her. Chloe, who hadn't even been there, who had listened to a second-hand clip sent by someone else, likely edited or framed to cast her as the innocent bystander once again. I felt something inside me harden, not with anger, but with finality. You know, I said, my voice low and measured, you keep saying I'm the strong one. But that's just a polite way of saying you think I can survive being forgotten. She started to protest, her voice cracking slightly, maybe from guilt, maybe from the first sliver of realization that I wasn't going to smooth this over like I always had, but I didn't let her finish. I didn't owe her that. Not anymore. Later that night, I sat with Tasha on her couch, the air thick with the scent of takeout and unspoken tension. She didn't ask if I was okay because she already knew the answer, and instead, she handed me her phone, open to a screenshot that made my stomach drop. It was a group chat, one I hadn't been part of, between Chloe and two of her close friends from high school, girls who'd always treated me like an older, irrelevant shadow. Chloe had been talking about me. Not just venting, but painting me as someone unstable, vindictive, even dangerous. She's always been weirdly competitive, one message read. I think she's jealous because she doesn't get attention. And then Chloe's reply, honestly, I think she might need help. She's been acting off for months. I stared at the words, not because they shocked me, nothing Chloe did surprised me anymore, but because of how easily she twisted reality, how casually she undermined me with people who barely knew me, all in the name of preserving her image. This wasn't just a tantrum. This was a campaign. A soft, quiet smear meant to isolate me, to make me question myself, to make others doubt what they saw in that speech. She's playing the long game, Tasha said, her voice sharp with that familiar fire. She's not crying in her room. She's laying groundwork. She's making you the villain, so she doesn't have to be the one who broke everything. And that's when it clicked. This wasn't just about graduation. This wasn't even about the speech. It was about control. Chloe couldn't handle the fact that, for once, the spotlight had shifted away from her, that I had taken the mic and said something she couldn't twist or interrupt or dilute. It was about narrative. And now, realizing she couldn't rewrite mine, she was trying to burn the pages altogether. That weekend, I got another call from my father, whose voice always carried the weary resignation of someone who never picked a side because he thought neutrality was the same as peace. Marissa, he sighed, as if I had caused an inconvenience rather than opened a wound. I just want everyone to move on. Can't we just? And I stopped him there, mid-sentence, not with anger, but with something colder. You always want to move on, I said, because staying in the moment would mean you'd have to actually feel something. The line went silent. I didn't apologize. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't sorry. I wasn't sorry for telling the truth. I wasn't sorry for ruining the illusion. And I wasn't sorry for finally putting myself first, even if it meant watching my entire family implode, one passive-aggressive post and hushed phone call at a time. There comes a moment, somewhere in the slow, quiet aftermath of chaos, where you realize that the storm you unleashed was never meant to be a hurricane, not something loud or destructive or immediately visible to the world, but rather a slow-moving pressure system, subtle and relentless, something that reshapes the entire landscape without anyone realizing it until it's too late, until the trees are leaning in new directions and the foundations have shifted so slightly that nothing ever really stands the same way again. That was what I wanted. Not fire. Not drama. Just silence, expertly placed. A silence so deafening that it would echo longer than any argument ever could. The week after the graduation, while the fallout of my speech was still being picked apart like gossip at a Sunday brunch table, I sat down at my tiny apartment desk, opened my laptop, and uploaded a video of my speech to a private alumni group I'd been invited to join only a few months before, a professional network of past valedictorians, scholars, and faculty members who prided themselves on uplifting the unheard voices of academic excellence. I didn't add commentary. I didn't beg for attention. I simply posted the clip with the caption, "A small reflection on the cost of silence." And then I logged off. By the end of the day, the video had been shared over 100 times. By the next morning, it had reached the inbox of a retired professor who now ran a semi-popular Substack dedicated to long-form essays on education and emotional resilience, and by the following Thursday, there it was, an op-ed titled, "Let's Talk About Invisible Daughters," with a link to my speech embedded in the first paragraph and a brief analysis of how families, even the most loving ones, often neglect the children who don't demand attention, all under the mistaken belief that strength is the same thing as satisfaction. I didn't share the article. I didn't repost it. I didn't send it to Chloe or my parents. But I knew it reached them because the silence was immediate and somehow heavier than the guilt-tripped voicemails or the angry calls. My mother, who once texted me daily with emojis and casual updates about Chloe's therapy milestones and weekend plans, went dark. My father, who still believed avoidance was a virtue, didn't even attempt his usual half-hearted, "Hey, kiddo, just checking in" text. Even Chloe, whose performative outrage usually couldn't last longer than 48 hours without morphing into some kind of cryptic Instagram content, said nothing. She didn't block me. She didn't call me. She simply vanished from my notifications, and for the first time, the absence didn't feel like rejection, it felt like power. Tasha was the one who kept the pulse, who forwarded me the screenshots when she noticed Chloe's friends speculating on group chats about whether something serious had happened in the family. One of them even commented under the article using a fake name, asking in a very not-so-subtle way, "Do families like this even realize the damage they cause?" I read it, then closed the tab. I wasn't interested in the drama. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense, not the kind that involves confrontation or retribution or some big, cinematic showdown. No. What I wanted, what I had always wanted, was simple: to be seen, to be heard, and to stop being expected to disappear. But the universe, in its own twisted way, wasn't done giving me leverage. 2 weeks after the article went viral in its small, academic corner of the internet, I received an email from a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., one that focused on educational equity and policy reform. The director, a sharp, thoughtful woman named Deborah, told me she'd seen the article, watched the video, and wanted to know if I'd be open to joining their communications team. It was an entry-level position, but one with room to grow, and the kicker was this: they'd read my personal blog, a tiny collection of essays I never promoted, and said my voice was exactly the kind of perspective missing in most institutional spaces. When I got the offer, I didn't cry. I didn't jump around. I just sat there, staring at the screen, thinking about how all it took was finally speaking up, not loudly, not angrily, but deliberately, to open doors that had always been closed when I was busy trying not to rock the boat. I accepted the position the next day and didn't tell my parents. Not because I wanted to be petty, but because I no longer felt obligated to include them in the moments that mattered to me. But, of course, news has a way of spreading, especially in families that only function when they believe they have control over the narrative. My mother found out, not through me, but through a distant cousin who followed the organization's page and had seen my welcome post. She called that evening, her voice tight with the kind of restraint that only appears when someone is deeply unsettled, but trying desperately to maintain grace. "I saw your big news," she said, and I could practically hear her blinking into her wine glass, rehearsing the next line. "You didn't think to tell us?" I didn't hesitate. "You didn't think to come to my graduation?" There was silence on the other end, thick and immediate, followed by a weak chuckle that didn't quite reach her throat. "We thought you needed space," she said, as though her absence had been a generous gift and not a calculated decision rooted in convenience. "We wanted to give you time to cool off." "I'm not angry," I said, and it was true. I wasn't. "I'm just not interested in pretending anymore." She tried again, switching tactics, slipping into the familiar maternal cadence that used to make me second-guess myself. "Marissa, families go through things. We made mistakes. But you don't burn the whole house down because of a few bad memories." "No," I replied, "but sometimes you realize you were never living in a house, just a stage set built to look like one." The next morning, I received a certified letter in the mail. A formal, meticulously worded notice informing me that my name had been removed from the family trust. No emotion. No explanations. Just signatures and terms, and at the bottom, a note written in my mother's delicate script: "We hope you'll come back when you're ready to be part of this family again." I read it once, then again, and then I placed it in the drawer beside the torn graduation invitation, the unused parents' seating tickets, and the dried tulip petals I couldn't bring myself to throw away after all. Because revenge doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it's just choosing not to answer the door when the people who locked you out for years suddenly remember you exist. Sometimes, it's silence. Sometimes, it's success. And sometimes, it's walking away, not because you're giving up, but because you finally understand that some rooms were never built for you in the first place. Time, I've learned, does not heal everything, it simply softens the edges until the shape of the wound feels less like a gaping, raw hole and more like a familiar scar you don't bother to cover anymore. Weeks passed, then months, and the noise surrounding my graduation, my speech, the article, and the resulting unraveling of whatever fragile illusion my family had constructed around our so-called unity eventually dulled into something more tolerable. A kind of background hum that only grew loud again when I stopped long enough to hear it. But mostly, life moved forward. And I let it. My new job in DC had a rhythm that was unfamiliar at first, structured, fast-paced, demanding in ways I hadn't anticipated, but there was something deeply stabilizing about waking up each morning with purpose, with an inbox full of meaningful work, with people who saw my value not as a given, not because of obligation or guilt, but because I showed up, delivered, and earned it. No one there cared who my sister was, or what role I had been forced into my whole life. No one asked about my parents, or what I had sacrificed to sit in that chair. I was just Marissa. And that, for once, was enough. Still, silence has a way of curdling if it sits too long, and as satisfying as the distance had been clean, liberating, necessary, it carried with it a kind of gravity that I couldn't ignore forever. There were questions left unasked, conversations unfinished, truths hanging in the air like unspoken verdicts. I hadn't heard from Chloe in nearly 3 months, and while I hadn't gone out of my way to check on her, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about her every time I passed someone with her laugh or saw a spa ad on the metro. Our history was messy, codependent, poisoned by years of lopsided affection, but beneath all that, there had once been moments of closeness, shared secrets whispered under blankets, late-night talks when we were teenagers and still believed we were on the same side of something. I didn't miss her chaos, but I missed the idea of a sister I never really had. Then, out of nowhere, came the message. Short, simple, unexpected. I'm in therapy. I get it now. I want to talk. It was a text I read twice, maybe 3 times, before I responded, not because I didn't know what to say, but because part of me no longer trusted anything that came from her so neatly packaged. Still, against every self-protective instinct I'd built over years of being overlooked and manipulated, I agreed to meet. Not because I believed she'd changed, but because closure isn't something you get from silence. It's something you choose to step into, knowing full well it might never be what you need it to be. We met at a cafe near Union Station, neutral ground, public enough that neither of us could spiral into theatrics, and when I saw her, same glossy hair, same effortless posture, the same expression of carefully restrained emotion. I almost didn't recognize her. Or maybe I did, and that was the problem. She looked exactly the same. But something in her eyes was different, maybe softer, maybe more tired. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. I know you think I've always tried to ruin your moments, she said, fingers wrapped around her coffee cup like it was the only thing anchoring her to the table. But I never did it on purpose. I don't know. I was used to being the one who needed help. And when someone gives you that role, you just keep playing it. I didn't know how to let you have your thing without feeling like I was disappearing. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her, and yet it didn't land the way I expected. I didn't feel vindicated or moved or even relieved. I just felt tired. Because what she said might have been true, but it didn't erase the years I spent being the collateral damage of her drama, didn't heal the parts of me that had calcified from years of being the second thought. I believe you, I said, finally, and I meant it. But that doesn't mean I owe you anything now. Her face fell slightly, not out of offense, I think, but out of understanding. For the first time, maybe ever, she didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't reach across the table and beg for absolution. She just nodded, took a sip of her coffee, and whispered, I know. We talked for another half hour, mostly surface-level stuff, her new therapist, my job, what our parents had or hadn't said since cutting me out of the trust. I told her I didn't care about the money, and I meant that too. It wasn't about the inheritance. It was about the message. About how easily they'd let me go the moment I stopped playing my part in the family performance. And as I walked back home that night, I felt no need to dissect the conversation or assign it a label. It wasn't reconciliation, and it wasn't a new beginning. It was a moment. Just a moment. One where I said what I needed to say, and heard what I needed to hear, and then kept walking. A week later, I got a message from my mother, her first direct communication since the trust letter. It was a forwarded photo from that same spa weekend. My parents and Chloe, all three of them smiling at the camera in white robes with champagne glasses in hand, the kind of picture that screams curated joy. Attached was a message that read, "We missed you that day. But you know we love you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because for all their attempts to pretend the family was still intact, to sweep the truth back under the rug and patch the cracks with carefully filtered photos and Hallmark sentiments, I knew better now. I knew that what I'd called a family for so many years was really just a house of mirrors, reflective, deceptive, impossible to navigate without losing sight of yourself. I deleted the message. Not out of spite. Not out of anger. But because I no longer felt compelled to keep evidence of a love that only existed on their terms. And as I sat by the window that night, city lights blinking across the skyline, the low hum of life moving outside my apartment, I finally allowed myself to say the thing I had been avoiding for months, the quiet truth that had been forming beneath all the speeches, all the silences, all the letters and absences and whispered apologies. They say I broke the family. They say I burned bridges, caused division, left behind something that could have been saved. But the truth is simpler, sharper, and far less poetic than they'll ever be willing to admit. I didn't break the family. I just stopped pretending I was ever part of it.